Okay, in terms of the stuff, deadlines remain unchangeable. So, exam 1, quizzes part 2, deadline October 19th. Exam 2, quizzes part 3, November 16th. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, December 7th, a date that's relevant infamy. And of course, exam 5, the final, if you need that, deadline's on December 14th at noon. So that way you get the full amount of time to complete the final. For the paper, draft deadline, November 9th, plus 5 deadline, November 14th, emergency deadline, November 21st, and the desperation deadline, December 8th. And the deadlines for turning the final version of paper, end of day on Blackboard. Before pressing on to new stuff, namely more stuff about our good dead friend Tommy Aquinas, anything about the stuff that has been, or the stuff that shall be, that needs more stuff. Okay, so this time we're looking at our good dead friend St. Thomas Aquinas, also known as the Ox. And as we saw, in terms of where he falls into the categories of people who talk about God, he's in the logic can help us, and in the subcategory of the a posteriori. So he's an empiricist in this regard, and he's going to try to argue that God exists, not based on just pure reason, but beginning with empirical evidence and then reasoning from that. So essentially empirical arguments stolen from Aristotle, repurposed, repainted for God. And as we saw, what he's putting forth is, in part, this kind of reasoning. If the world has these features, God must exist. The world's got this quality, God exists. And he also advances a second type of argument. We saw the ontological argument, so that's the one of 3 ways of arguing for God. And the ontological argument is the God is perfect, so he's got to exist, because if he didn't, he wouldn't be perfect, but he is, so he does. Another type of argument is the cosmological argument. And cosmology deals with the origin of all of the stuff. And so cosmological arguments are arguments about the origin and the beginning of the stuff. In the case of God, crudely put, the argument is basically there had to be something to create everything, and this had to be uncreated, and this has got to be God. So, God. And we'll also see the third argument of the Trinity, which is the argument from design, which is basically the universe has a design, no design without a designer, God's the designer, God exists. And that gives the kind of the 3 standard ways of arguing for God. But without further ado, to the 5 ways. Now, as I noted, these ways were essentially stolen, or rather borrowed, from Aristotle. And Aristotle, of course, was a clean pagan. So what he has to do is modify them a bit to go from where Aristotle ended up, which obviously is not the God of Christianity, but to get to God. And so these arguments are based on ones used by Aristotle to argue for, in the case of the unmoved mover, what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. So what are these ways? Well, way 1 is this, the way of motion. Now it begins with things that are empirically based. And this one, of course, begins with stuff moves. Now, does that seem true? Is stuff moving? Seems like it. Because you look around, the mere fact you're looking around means you're moving. Now, pretty much everyone, with some exceptions, believes that stuff moves. How could there be anybody that believes stuff doesn't move? Well, I mentioned our good dead friend Parmenides before. Again, his name sounds like a cheese, so if someone offers you Parmenides on a sandwich, take that. Mm-hmm. And he had an argument, he had the view that nothing changes. Change is an illusion. And one of his followers, student named Zeno, which is kind of a cool name, Zeno created a multitude of paradoxes backing up Parmenides. And one of them is the paradox of movement, which is, infinite regress. In order for me to get from here to the desk, I've got to go the full distance. But to get there, I got to go halfway first. But of course, to get to the halfway point, I got to get to the halfway of the halfway point, and so on, to infinity. And so I'd have to take an infinite number of steps, cover an infinite distance to reach the depths. It's infinitely divisible. So movement cannot occur. Now, Aquinas, of course, doesn't accept that. So he begins with stuff moves. But keep in mind that there are other thinkers, well, at least two, that claim there is no movement. So far, so good. Question. Now, we saw that Aquinas took from Aristotle the idea of actuality, being that, and potentiality, that it could be that. And he uses them here. He claims whatever is moved by something has to be moved by something else. Why? Well, his reasoning is based on this potentiality, actuality stuff. So something that's not moving but could be moved is potentially moving or actually moving? Yeah, potentially, because it could be moved, but it's not. So he claims that something moves when it goes from potentially moving, could be moved, to actually moving. And to illustrate this, he gives an example of fire. So the way fire makes things hot is that fire is actually hot, and then it takes things that are potentially hot and sets them on fire, and it makes them hot. I mean, you can use an example of, well, cooking. You've got a gas stove, you put the pan on it, it starts, the pan is cool, potentially hot but not hot. Put it on the fire, and it goes from potentially hot to actually hot, as most of us learn as kids. That one time, it's like, shh, never again. Now, so far so good. So how does he get to, you can't have stuff move itself, and how does he get to God? Well, here's how it goes. He claims that if you have something that is actually has a particular quality, let's take actually hot, it can't be potentially hot at the same time, because a thing can only be actually and potentially in the case of different things. Like in the case of heat, it can't be actually hot but potentially hot. It can't be actually cold and potentially cold. Now, it doesn't mean that something hot can't get hotter, but if it's already hot, it can't be potentially hot because it is hotter. It's potentially hotter, which makes sense. If something is already, or we can take the example of graduated. If you've already graduated, you're an actual graduate. I mean, you could become a graduate again. Some people go back to school for other degrees. Some people go back lots, many times, get all kinds of degrees. But if someone is actually graduated, they're no longer potentially graduated for that because they've already done it. And they can go and do another degree, but they've already done that. So far, so good. Now, combining these together, he thinks he gets the result that if in order to move, you got to be potentially moving, and you got to be moved by something that's actually moving, and you can't be both actually moving and potentially moving, so that means nothing can move itself. So you couldn't move yourself, because you'd have to be moving to move yourself, but if you're already moving, you're moving, so you're not potentially moving. So you got to be moving to move things, but if you're already moving, you're not potentially moving, so you can't move yourself. Or so he claims. I mean, one way to think of it better is think of a smartphone with a battery. Now, can a battery charge itself? No, because you'd just be running a loop. So you have to have something that's got a charge to charge the battery. So to be charged, it's got to be potentially charged, otherwise it's already full. And to charge something else, it's got to be actually charged. Because you can get one of those handy battery packs, especially the solar power ones, super handy. Especially when we have hurricanes and stuff, you've got a stack of those things. And you plug it in your phone, and it will charge the battery. And so we think of it that way, yeah, that makes sense. Something that is charged can charge something else, but it can't charge itself. Because if it doesn't have a charge, it can't charge itself, and if it's charged, it doesn't need to charge itself because it's charged. So he claims that something cannot move it itself. So whatever is moved has got to be moved by another. So whatever. Now, you may be thinking, well, can't I move myself? Because I'm walking. I don't have to be like, it's not like I have to be like wheeled around in a wheelchair, or like with a car, cars drive themselves. Now, what he means in this case is, of course, going on with an infinite regress. Well, he doesn't use this particular example, but let's take this example. Well, he does use the example of a staff moved by a hand. So, if I'm moving the backpack can't move itself. I gotta move it. But it seems like I'm moving myself. But of course, talking about like all of this is kind of simplifying things, because when my arm moves, it's the muscles, contracting, attached to the bones, causing movement. But then of course the muscles, their moving is caused by the individual muscle cells, and inside the cells, there's the mitochondria running through the Krebs acid cycle. I remember that from high school and out of physiology. It stuck, just because it sounded weird. Krebs acid cycle. Sounds like an alternative band. Probably is. And then of course the mitochondria had to get their energy from someplace. Something ate, which had to, and then of course it had to get its energy from something else. And of course you keep tracing it back. And so the path, the simple act of me moving this would trace back, to the sun, because that's where the energy came from. Then of course the sun came from the energy, they got the energy from something. And if this goes to infinity, there'd be nothing. There would be no motion. So there had to be a first mover that, put everything into motion, moves, set the galaxy and the universe in motion, which set the solar system in motion, would put the sun in motion, which eventually leads to me pushing it back. Brought to you by the sun. Brought to you by, the beginning. Now Aristotle would agree with this. If Aristotle and Tommy Aquinas were sitting in the room, they'd both be, yep, 100% right. So where do they part company? Well, for Aristotle, this would be the unmoved mover. Now, the unmoved mover for Aristotle is kind of like God. It is, pretty awesome, and it thinks. But the big difference between the unmoved mover and God is this. The unmoved mover, according to Aristotle, does not care about us. Why? Well, if it could care, then it would be moved by our suffering, moved by our plight. So it can't be moved by us. But God, of course, at least in the normal view, does God care about us? Yeah. But apparently for Aquinas, that's not being moved by us. Now he says, and the wording is careful, he doesn't say this is God, he's very careful in his wording. He says this everyone understands to be God. Because he's aware that what he's got is a first mover, and there's still a gap between first mover and the God of Christianity. But he says, his argument essentially is, yeah, everyone, who does this, it can only be God. So stuff moves, stuff can't move itself. If it's going to move, it's going to be moved by something else. This can't go off in infinite regress, so you need something that can move, but is not itself moved, and this is God. Now, kind of the challenge, of course, to make this argument work, and one Aquinas recognized himself, is, again, the gap between first mover and getting to God. Because Aristotle said, yeah, first mover. You could have, someone who's a total atheist and say, yes, there was a first mover, like whatever, did the Big Bang, but that's not God. So you could accept this argument up until this point, but then reject the leap to God. And which Aquinas is, or was, because he's dead, aware of. Or maybe he still is. If there's an afterlife, then he's probably still aware of it. He's probably looking at people teaching his stuff going, no, you're getting it wrong. Teach it better. Second way. Now this is the way of the efficient cause. Now, the notion of efficient cause is taken from Aristotle. And Aristotle had 4 types of causes. which will seem kind of weird by today's standards, but make some sense. Now, one type of cause for Aristotle is known as the material cause. It's the matter that makes up stuff. Now, normally we wouldn't think of, like, if we're talking like the cause of a shoe, we normally wouldn't think, oh yeah, the cause of the shoe is like the leather and the plastic and so forth. But when you think about it, you think of a cause as if you didn't have, you know, X, you wouldn't have the result, the shoe. Then that makes sense, because if you didn't have the leather and the plastic and so forth, you wouldn't have the shoe. So part of the explanation of why the shoe is in existence would be the matter that makes it up. Aristotle also had the notion of what's called a formal cause, which sounds like a cause that, you know, wears a tux, a kind of James Bond James cause. But he doesn't mean that. By formal cause, he means literally the form. It's the structure, the design of the thing. And literally he meant, you know, form. We'll see this when we talk about Plato. To use a modern contemporary metaphor, think of like a 3D printer. And the spool of plastic would be the material cause, whatever you're printing. Say you're printing a you know, little plastic dragon or something. And the plan, the file, you know, 3D file of the dragon would be the form, and the plastic would be the material cause. There's also for him what he calls the final cause, which again is kind of an odd word translation, because normally we mean by final what? Yeah, the end, the last thing. Now in a way it's kind of not terrible, because final means the end, and the end not only means like stop of something, it also means the goal or the purpose. And Aristotle believed that there's also the final cause, which is the purpose of the thing. So for example, going back to the 3D printer printing the dragon, maybe you're printing the dragon to give us a gift. That's its purpose. Or you just like dragons. You want to have a little plastic dragon to sit on your desk in your cubicle to keep from being sad. Oh, my free dragon. If only I was free flying and burning things like you. I guess it could be consoling. Someone sitting in their cubicle whispering to their plastic dragon. I'm sure HR wouldn't be worried about that at all. And so the fourth cause is the efficient cause. Now again, the wording is kind of weird, because efficient, we all mean it as what? Yeah, it's got a good quality. Like we think of, like, you know, literally fuel efficiency in a car that gets a lot of miles to the gallon or the charge. But in this case, it doesn't mean like it's a cause that gets a lot of, you know, miles to the gallon. Efficient cause is the process that produces something. For example, the parents of the efficient cause of the child, the 3D printer that prints off a little plastic dragon would be the efficient cause. It's a process that made it. Now, the second way is, some may say, needlessly complicated, because he doesn't just go right to an infinite regress. He infinite regresses and then puts in some more parts and infinite regresses those, and so kind of, well, you might say he overdoes it a bit, but I guess he's being thorough. Now he begins again with something we observe, namely, in the world there's an order of efficient causes of things producing things. And he claims, probably correctly, that nothing can be the efficient cause of itself. And we could use, to illustrate it, we could use the example of you know, a child and parents. In the normal course of things, could a child be their own parent or parents? No, because you know they'd have to exist to be their parents, but if they already exist, they don't need parents. Similarly, like you can't have a 3D printer that prints itself. You can have a 3D printer that adds to itself. You know, like you have a simple printer like keeps adding more and more to itself, but you couldn't have like the printer print itself because it wouldn't exist. Now, interestingly, if you bring in time travel though, you can have things being the cause of themselves. all you gotta do is believe in time travel. There's a classic story by a sci-fi writer, Robert Heinlein. It used to be really big back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So these books are still around. They're still pretty good. And he had this story in which a person is their own father and mother through time travel and sex change. So it's kind of a weird story. But it does, it does give an interesting illustration of how a person could be their own parents. And sometimes in mythology, they have gods that are their own parents, which you bring, get time travel or magic, you can get stuff like that going somehow. But in general, if we leave aside time travel, then yeah, nothing can be its own parent. But if we bring in time travel, or maybe some other, magical process, then maybe we could break that rule. Now he notes that you can't go on to infinity, no infinite regress of efficient causes, because you need a first cause, intermediate causes, and then the whole chain. And if you were to take away the cause, you take away the effect. I mean, to use a kind of an accurate but simple example, if the wire to the bulbs was cut, the bulbs would, they go up. If you're using like the timeline, like a timeline, if there was some way to I guess weirdly bring in time travel, if there's a way to go back in time and eliminate people's parents, they of course wouldn't be here anymore. And everyone's heard about sci-fi stories where people go back in time trying to kill Hitler, or trying to kill Hitler's parents. And the idea, of course, if you go back in time and eliminated something, you would change the timeline. There's a story by Ray Bradbury about that, where they have people pay to go back in time to shoot dinosaurs. And they're really careful about it, they make sure, get the fossils, make sure that the dinosaurs were to die. And then, since it's, got a twist ending, someone steps off the walkway and crushes a butterfly. And they come back and the whole world is different. The language and everything is changed from that one difference. And so, if the cause was altered, then you'd lose all the steps in between. So, I mean, here's a time travel one. If someone traveled back in time and killed Adam and Eve, there would be no one here. Which is probably why God doesn't allow time travel, because he'd screw up the timeline. And of course, you get all kinds of, talking about time travel, you get all kinds of weird, paradoxes and results. And we'll talk about some of those in the future, or in the past, every time travel. So he's right. If you had to go back to infinity, you would end up with no first cause, no ultimate effect, no immediate causes, and you'd have nothing. So his view is, if you have to have an infinite number of causes, we'd have nothing now. So what do you need? Well, you need a first efficient cause that's uncaused, that causes everything but is not itself caused, to get everything going. Because if something needs a cause, then it needs something else. If someone needs parents, then they need something else. And then if their parents need parents, they need parents. So you need something through the book. You need something that doesn't need their parents to be here to create everything else. And this is a cosmological argument in terms of causing everything. So where did everything come from? Well, everyone calls that God. Now, again, Aquinas is careful. He doesn't just go right to God. He says, whichever one gives the name God. Which is, of course, not true, because not everyone does. So for people who are atheists who believe in the Big Bang, or whatever made it, would be the first efficient cause. And the same paradox or problems arise in science as well. If you have the first thing, people always want to ask, well, what, people will say in atheist, arguments, who created God? And of course, if you say something created God, then you can ask who created that. But the same problem arises for everyone. Namely, if you have someone who's an atheist that says, well, who created God? Ha, 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 so much for God. Their reply back is, well, who created, what created this? And you've got to have a first cause, or you get nothing, or time travel. You get that weird, weird paradox. So the second way is basically stuff can't cause itself. So if you get a cause that needs a cause, then there's two options. One is infinite regress, in which case you get nothing. Other option is you need a cause that is not itself caused, a first cause, and if you have that, then you can have stuff. The clearly stuff, there's got to be a first cause. This, of course, is God. His third way brings in what's known in philosophy as modality. And in philosophy, it means the field of what is a possibility, what could be, and necessity, what must be. And if you've ever had computer programming, there are also what are called modal windows. They're the super annoying ones. If you ever use like a computer or like a tablet, they're the ones that you can't move or close until you do something with them, like hit OK or something. They're super annoying. And they shouldn't even allow, my own view is they should not even allow those to be there. It's just like, unless it's just so important, that's the only thing you should be doing, which is pretty much nothing. So the modal window, because when I first saw that when I was learning a computer program, I was like, possibility, necessity? What does that mean? Then I'm like, oh yeah, it's a window you can't close. But nothing to do with modality in philosophy. Now, so what does it mean here by possibility and necessity? Well, as I mentioned, philosophers talk weird stuff about possibility and necessity, but it actually does make some kind of sense, I guess, if you read a lot of science fiction. A lot of philosophy makes more sense that way. Now, possibility, pretty much everyone gets. If something's possible, it means it, what? Yeah, it could happen, but it doesn't have to. We usually think of things like, well, pretty much everything, especially like in sports and elections and so forth. We talk about, pretty much everything could happen, but we can easily imagine cases where like it wouldn't, and something would go wrong or right to prevent it from happening. Now, things that are merely possible are what are called contingent. You might have heard of contingency plans. It's plans people have when things go wrong, which are good plans to have because things always go wrong. Now, metaphysically, you can also talk about beings being possible beings or contingent beings. They're beings that are things that could exist, maybe do exist, but don't have to, because there could be, a scenario in which they don't exist. It could either be that they can go out of existence. For example, well, pretty much all of us. Eventually we all die, so our bodies are contingent. They'll eventually just, go back to their component parts. Backpacks, markers, sandwiches, they're all merely contingent because eventually they won't be anymore. You eat the sandwich is gone. Now, you can also look at it in terms of not just things that can be like go out of existence, cease to be what they are. You can also think of it in terms of, again, science fiction, like about what, a world where you wouldn't have this happen or wouldn't have this person. For example, you could easily imagine a world where somebody's parents didn't meet. Think of like a story of how, somebody's parents met by pure chance. They met like on one missed their flight or something, and they were talking at the airport. But you can imagine the flight was never missed, so they never met, and so their kids were never born. And so we could think of any person as being possible because things could have been different. They might not have, or you can think of like near-death experiences, which instead of surviving, one didn't make it. So what about necessary stuff? Well, we normally think of necessity as what? Yeah, like food, water, Netflix, that type of stuff. But in philosophy, a necessity in this context doesn't mean something you gotta have to like avoid death. It means to be necessary means it's something that must exist, that it can't not be. It has to be the case. So in the case of like a truth, a necessary truth is a truth that's always true. It can't be false. Like triangles having three sides. You consider, you can't have a triangle without being three-sided. They're also supposedly necessary beings, and they're beings that cannot not be. I mean, in a sense, if they truly were necessary, they would be immortal and indestructible, because they can never, they always have to be. They couldn't cease to be. They also would exist in any possible world. Like, there could not be a world without them. So being necessary would be would be like the greatest superpower, because you can never be killed, you can never be destroyed, you'd always have to exist. Although once everybody else died, I guess it could be kind of boring, exploding like an empty space, a dead universe. So how does he get from possible stuff to God existing? Well, here's how he runs through it. He begins, again, with an empirical observation. There's stuff that can be and can also cease to be. Crudely put, there's stuff that can perish. And we can also think of there's stuff that, maybe it does exist but doesn't have to. Or, the crudest version, there's stuff that can just die or cease to be. Now he claims, and this is where it starts getting more controversial. The first one seems reasonable, that there's stuff that can go out of existence, doesn't have to be. Now he claims these can't always exist, which is, probably true. Because if there's something that is, crudely put, perishable, eventually it's going to perish. I mean, think of like the milk in your refrigerator. Milk. Eventually the milk will go bad and stop being milk. If you ever wonder what milk turns into, when it's been like left out a long time, it turns into like well, sometimes the conditions are right, it'll turn into like, it'll look like a chunk of like white rubber. I know this for a friend of mine, because she left like milk out, and I was like, what's that? She's like, it's the milk I had a couple weeks ago. I'm like, yeah. But it was, in a way, it wasn't like dirty in a way, because it wasn't molded, it was just like a lump of like plastic. It was super, super weird.
Was she experimenting?
No, she just didn't clean that glass up. But apparently they did make some of the early plastics, I remember this vaguely, but you want to check with Google, they made from milk. I suppose you could like, when I saw that, I remember that, I'm like, I guess they were right.
Yeah, some people are allergic to like latex and stuff that makes you cool.
Yeah, it could be this, milk, they learned it's a milk allergy sometimes. Yeah, so, things that can perish, eventually they would perish. Things that can die will eventually die. Now, so far so good. But then he claims, therefore, if everything could perish, everything could die, at one time there'd have to be nothing. Now, that of course can be argued, because maybe everything can perish where it just hasn't perished yet. Because like everything in your fridge can perish, but you wouldn't say that there could be, therefore my fridge must be empty, because everything in it can perish. So his reasoning is, if anything can perish, that would mean that at one point there had to be nothing. Which again, a matter of debate, because it could be that things, you know, appear and then can perish, and eventually there'll be nothing. And we just haven't hit that expiration point yet. Or maybe he's right. Maybe if everything could perish, you would have nothing now. So kind of the question is, could you have a universe that has an expiration date, where everything is going to perish? And some people think, yeah. I mean, because one of the things people study in astrophysics now is how is the universe going to end? And the theories of now they have really silly names, like the Big Rip, where the universe like tears apart. And there's like the other ones as well. Like there's the heat death one, where everything, you know, the universe just, everything is just a constant temperature. Then there's like the cold death, other weird names. So yeah, kind of the question is, could the universe, you know, perish? Aquinas seems to think not, because he thinks that it could perish, then everything would have perished, and there'd be nothing now. But there is something now. Now, if there was at one point nothing, could we start getting something? Can we get something from nothing? Supposedly no. You know, one generally accepted rule in philosophy and science is no ex nihilo creation. You can't get something from nothing. But then the question is, if you can't get something from nothing, where does something come from? Where do you get your something from? So if you can't get something from nothing, and at one point there was nothing, there would still be nothing now. But is there more than nothing now? Yes, a lot more than nothing. So he reasons like this. There's got to be something whose existence is necessary. That is, it can't not be. And since it can't not be, it presumably never would have been created. It can never go out of existence. It must always be. So it's the something from which you get everything else. Yeah, all other things come from that. Now at this point, you think he would just sort of say, okay, there's got to be a necessary being, boom. But he hasn't run his infinite regress yet. I guess he bought a bucket of those. He bought like a half a dozen. He wants to use them all. You know, maybe save a spare for later, just in case one of them breaks. So what he claims is this: if you have a necessary thing, whatever that is, either it gets its necessity from itself, or it gets its necessity from something else. It becomes necessary because some other being, yeah, made it so. How could that be? Well, think of like, take an example of a necessary truth, like triangles having three sides. They're necessary because, on one view, because something created triangles, you know, like God. You couldn't have made a universe without triangles. But you could say, like, you know, if you have triangles made, they gotta be three-sided, but they don't give themselves their necessity. They have to be made. Now, since this can't go into infinity, you gotta have a necessary being, because otherwise it'd be nothing. This necessary being either gets its necessity from itself or something else, but you can't have an infinite regress. So you gotta have a necessary being that has its own necessity and causes anything else necessary its necessity. And this, you know, again, he carefully says, this all men speak of as God. So basically what he's saying is, you gotta have something that's always been, that can't go out of existence and wasn't created. Because if you didn't have that, you'd have nothing. And you can't get something from nothing, you have to get something from something. And if something has to be a necessary being, it has to have always been. And this is God. Now Aristotle solved this problem by having the whole universe be uncreated and necessary. So instead of having, God in this role, Aristotle says the world is eternal. So you don't need, it doesn't need to be created, because it's always been. It always will be, world without end. So that's the way of possibility and necessity. Before heading to gradation, and then his design argument, anything about this that needs more stuff? Fourth way, gradation. This one's also, of course, stolen from Aristotle and a bit stolen from Plato. Now, it begins, as always, with something pretty plausible. Namely, if you're talking about anything, whenever you take a quality that has degrees, there's some things that have got more of it, and some things that got less of it. A good example would be like height. Tall people have got more height than shorter people. Hotter things have more heat than less hot things. Delicious things have more deliciousness than less delicious things. Now, so far, so good. Now, the second thing he turns to is more debatable. And it's a question of, when we're saying that something is more or less, what are we doing? Now, predicated is, of course, from a term used in English. English has many languages have a subject-predicate structure. Subject, the thing you're talking about, predicate, the quality you attribute to it. And so to predicate something of something is to attribute to it a quality. So if I say the folder is reddish, a fancier way of saying that is I am predicating of the folder that it is red, which is a roundabout, needlessly long way of saying it. So in a way, we say that things are more or less, according to Aquinas. Why? Well, normally we think we're comparing the two things. So if we say that, say, Sally is taller than Sam, we normally think we're comparing them. She's got more height than he has. Now, an alternative way, and the one Aquinas embraces, is that when we say something is more or less, we're not comparing them directly to each other, we're comparing them to the maximum of that type. So, kind of crudely put, when we say that Sally is taller than Sam, we're saying that Sally is closer to the tallest, whatever, either the tallest thing, or if you want to be metaphysical, simply the tallest. And Sam is less close to it. Now, it may seem a little bit weird, unless, of course, you consider, for example, the way a test can be graded. When you grade someone's test, or like the ones on Blackboard, if someone, if Sally gets a 90 and Bill and Sam gets a 70, 70 is more than, or 90 is more than 70. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 90 is closer to the 100 than the 70. It's bigger because it's closer. And her score, she got the 90 because her answer sheet is closest to the perfect answer sheet. And so that does make some sense. Now, so how does he get from that to God? Well, here's how he does it. He claims, since we can say, anything, any quality that comes in degrees, more or less, and if we accept that more or less is not comparing the things to each other, not comparing Sally to Sam, but comparing that, them to the maximum of that type, he claims it follows, for every quality, presumably quantity too, there's got to be the best. So there's got to be something that is the most true, something that is the best, something that is the noblest. And he also believes that, since it applies to any quality, he believes that there must be something that is most in being, or, in Aristotle's terms, the most real. So then, how does he get to God? Well, here, he steals some Plato and Aristotle. As we'll see in the future with Plato, Plato claims that the reason why anything is what it is, the reason why like all cats are cats, is because of a form. So cats are cats because of the form of cat. Humans are humans because of the form of human. Just stuff is just because of the form of justice. Now he claims, as Plato and Aristotle did, that the maximum of any kind is the cause of all of that kind. So the cause of, say, height would be the tallest, or the highest. The cause of justice would be, the most just, the perfect justice. Straightforward Aristotle and Plato. Now at this point, if Plato and Aristotle were in the room with Aquinas, they'd be agreeing. I mean, that's Plato's theory, as we'll see in the future, is there's a perfect form for every thing. And Aristotle will say, there's a form, for every quality. But here's where he switches to God. Unlike Plato, who made every quality, as we'll see, separate. So Plato's view is there's a form of justice, a form of beauty, a form of humanity, every quality, there's a separate form. What Aquinas does is he wraps them all together into one being. So instead of saying each quality has an individual perfect form, they're separate beings, his claim is there's one being that's got it all. So it's got perfect justice, perfect beauty, the perfect form of humanity. Everything's in there. It's got all this stuff. And at that point, of course, Plato and Aristotle would say, whoa, that's too far. So when you end up with a perfect being that has every quality to the best, well, what would you call a being who has every quality to perfection? God. So this has got to be, and once again he says, this being we call God. And he never just says God, he always says we call that God, because he's being careful. That, perfect timing, right to 3:20. I say that's a years of experience and lots of luck. It does. So a good weekend.